There's a myth out there that saving sex for marriage is outdated and no longer practiced, that it provides no social or physical benefit, that young women and men can't say no to sex. It's also said abstinence isn't relevant to the lives of you guys, whether you're in high school, college, or beyond. Today we're going to debunk all those myths. My guests are going to bring you face to face with some good reasons why you should wait for the ring. I spoke with a group of people keenly interested in the benefits of abstinence. This included a national author and speaker on the topic, the president and founder of an abstinence awareness organization that counsels people of all ages, and a group of young adults who have a personal stake in the issue. I wanted to find out what they have to say about abstinence until marriage. When did you first learn about abstinence, and how was the idea pitched to you initially?
I learned about abstinence in high school, and it was pitched to me with a health class, but they were talking about STDs and condom use and pregnancies and all that, but it wasn't taught like you should choose abstinence because you're saving yourself for marriage. It's just be abstinent just so you won't get STDs or get pregnant. But when I learned the true meaning of abstinence, it was probably like 4 months ago. It was just the whole concept of it. It was beautiful to me.
Like Alicia, I also learned about it through junior high and high school in health class, but it was always given as an option. There's abstinence, and then there's ways to practice safe sex. It was never pitched as this is the way to choose.
I think for me, the pitch for abstinence wasn't really there. It was a thing that was encouraged but wasn't spoken about. You might have gotten it once or twice at church during the year, or your parents would have that one lifetime talk about, you know, if you're going to do something smart. But there's not really, when I was growing up, a decision for abstinence. It was, you know, if you're going to have sex, have safe sex, and know who you're sleeping with, and there wasn't really a pitch for it.
Would you say that abstinence until marriage is a lifestyle?
I would, because I guess it all comes from where you come from and who teaches you and how you learn things. Like her and I come from two totally different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Her lifestyle is different from my lifestyle. Her parents' lifestyle is probably different from my parents' lifestyle. So she was able to be brought up in a lifestyle that preached abstinence where I wasn't. So I think it is a lifestyle. Well, now it's my lifestyle, so yes, it's a lifestyle.
I think it's a lifestyle as well, just because not only abstinence from sex, but abstinence from other things that it's just kind of like a gateway, you know, drinking underage and drugs and sex and all that kind of stuff. If you have the mentality of, you know, abstaining from sex, you're gonna also have, you know, the mindset of abstaining from other things. And I think that once you understand and you have respect for yourself and you put, you know, your own goals and your aspirations, and you don't let those kind of things get like the drugs and the alcohol and the sex and those kind of things involved, then that becomes a lifestyle. So I think it all is inclusive.
It is a lifestyle, and who you hang out with that share those opinions and guide you one way or another.
What makes you think we should believe you guys when you're telling us you're not having sex and that it's a better way of life for you?
Well, for me, I have personally just seen a lot of people that have had sex and have experienced the consequences of having sex. Going to a high school of, you know, 2,000 kids, I've seen girls pregnant and with STDs and had to go through abortions, and for me, that's just something that I don't want to have to go through. And like the guys have said earlier, there's just so much more to a relationship than the physical aspect. And you know, I want somebody to love me for me, not what I can do physically or what kind of sex we can have. I don't want it to be like that. I want a man to love me for who I am.
That kind of connection that you create is designed for a committed relationship. And when you're not committed, things are being broken in your lifestyle. You're trying to break something that's connecting you. So I think anyone will tell you, if they're being honest, that sex really is best when only in a committed relationship.
I think for me, it's there's the assumption everyone's having sex, and that's what media is telling you. You know, look at that advertisements, look at these television shows, but the people I hang out with, they're not going around sleeping with everybody. There's a lot of people out there who have chosen this lifestyle. And people that really look at, you know, science and statistics, it shows that, you know, there's still a risk. Just because they advertise condoms equal protection, that's not there. You know, you still have a 50% chance of catching a chlamydia or syphilis or gonorrhea, even if you do use a condom. So if you actually take the time to realize the consequences that could even end your life, I mean, it seems like an informed, smart decision.
So you guys seem to be collectively telling me that everybody isn't doing it?
Yeah.
Okay. And that there's benefits to waiting?
I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of kids that are having sex, but there also are a lot of kids who are not having sex. And to me, it just seems like it's more publicized of the kids that are having sex rather than the kids that aren't.
Why should people care about remaining abstinent until marriage? What's the big deal?
They should care about being in a loving, committed relationship when you get married. They should care about catching STDs, HIV. Your whole life could be taken from you. I mean, it's a lot that goes along with sex. But when you just think, oh, I want to have sex or whatever the case may be, you don't think about. You don't think, I mean, oh, I might get pregnant. But when you're actually pregnant, you're faced with all kind of stuff. I mean, abstinence, you only have one thought. Abstaining, I will not have sex, until marriage.
Everybody desires to have somebody just love them, and care about them and do anything for them. So I just think that, everybody deserves that too. So in order to get that, I just think that we need, abstaining from sex until you're married and you're with somebody that truly loves you, you can have the best of both worlds when you're married.
When we return, Alicia talks about the one person who helped her understand the benefits of putting sex on hold until marriage. And we'll also hear from a positive and persuasive individual who's using that influence to change a community.
Facing life. Facing life. Facing life.
Each of these people have one thing in common. They're abstaining from sex until marriage. I asked one of the group members to explain what convinced her to choose this lifestyle. So when was the turning point that changed the way you looked at premarital sex?
It wasn't really a turning point. It was like, it was just smacked in my face. Because, it was just bad decision after bad decision and bad relationship after bad relationship, and I didn't really grasp on to the concept of abstinence until it was brought to my attention, but that was just the way I was living.
So was that when Mamie entered your life?
Yeah, and even though I haven't known her for that long, it feels like I have, and she's just been remarkable as far as teaching me her mission, her drive, and her ambition. It was just like, wow, people care. She cares.
Mamie Harris is the founder and president of For Carice. The organization educates people, like Alicia, about equal responsibility by equipping them to understand the purpose of sex. Mamie, I was going to ask you to think back to the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s, but obviously that was before your time. So, how do you think feelings or norms have changed regarding premarital sex since that time?
Even though some of the reasons we were given for not being sexually involved were kind of crazy, it did carry a message of responsibility. We were taught that there's a responsibility. You don't see that anymore. Now the sexual revolution comes saying there is no responsibility with sex. It doesn't teach that there is a spiritual, physical, and a moral obligation that goes along with sexual contact. Everything is good for you. They teach you, go ahead and do it. They don't talk to them about the fact that even though we promote condoms, there is no condom big enough to cover a broken heart. So I think that where we lost things is that we lost a sense of value because we no longer teach self-control, we no longer teach self-discipline, and we no longer teach delayed gratification. So somebody has to bring that message to kids. If not in the homes, then in the church. If not in the church, then in the schools. But somebody has to be teaching that. I mean, I think we need to teach equal responsibility. So when we teach equal responsibility to the young men as well as the young women. And it's not to scare them. We don't use scare tactics. We don't try to make them feel that sex is dirty and bad. We just try to teach them appropriate behavior at appropriate time. We try to teach them that there is purpose in their life, but where purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. If you don't know the purpose for sex, if you don't know the purpose for yourself, you will abnormally abuse, abnormally use yourself. And you can't go back to regain time. You can't redeem it.
What are the benefits, Mamie, to teaching abstinence for society?
I think what I see with our kids that hear us is they become more and more aware that they are special, that sex is special, that in the confines of a marital situation you have security, you have commitment, you have love, you have all the basic foundations that go into making the proper relationship. I believe people make good choices. When we know better, we do better.
Specifically, what type of resources do you offer these young people?
We try to lead with them pamphlets, information that has been approved by abstinence clearinghouses, that have been cleared by MISH, medical institution, so that we make sure that they're information that have been studied and have been approved by CDC, statistics that CDC have put out. We try to leave them with our phone number. I always make myself available. Some kids are now asking us for mentoring programs, and that's something that we would love to see in place so that we have a continued communication with them. Because once I leave them, even though I've given them all that positive information, they have to go back into their own environments.
How does your organization get its funding?
That's an interesting question. At one time, we were funded through the abstinence programs here, one in Columbus, Ohio, under Catherine Wood's Abstinence Education Network, and we did some collaborative work with pregnancy care. But when our new governor came in, Governor Strickland, and he decided to not accept the funding that came from the government to help Title V monies, and when he decided to abruptly not accept those fundings, it was agencies like mine that suffered the most.
Title V is the abstinence only until marriage program. It ensures each state receives a share of the $50 million grant from the federal government. Ohio's governor, where Mamie Harris lives, rejected nearly $8 million available for abstinence only education, which begs the question, why?
Abstinence education has been under attack for a long time. Why people feel that abstinence is such a threat to their lifestyle? Everybody has been attacking abstinence education. This has not been a one-time move. This has been lobbied for a long time to come against this program that promotes sexual abstinence till marriage. And abstinence is not meant to infringe on the rights of anybody. It's meant to give freedom, freedom of thought, freedom in action. I think we're more liberal in our education when we talk about, okay, we give you the right to choose, but let's give you correct information. So when you make that choice, you make it with full knowledge. We have 265 million people living with sexually transmitted diseases. That didn't just happen since President Bush authorized funding for abstinence. Those numbers existed prior to the push for abstinence. If we did not begin to intervene with the abstinence message coming forth boldly, with those kind of numbers, where do you think we would be in another 10 years? So we have to give credit to abstinence education, even if we don't want to. The only thing we're asking for as abstinence educators is the right to teach the other side.
When we return, author and speaker Chad Eastham redefines the meaning of abstinence until marriage.
When we're talking about abstinence, we're not talking about not doing something. We're talking about understanding the opposite sex.
Facing life. Facing life. Facing life.
Today we're talking to people about the topic of abstinence until marriage. We're finding out if this lifestyle can benefit society on a large scale. Abstinence is a term that's thrown about quite a bit these days. Tell me how you define abstinence.
I'm not even sure I like that word a lot of times. Abstinence to me is very little to do with sex, and it's much more to do with a student learning about each other. I don't know why it's controversial to some people to talk about why 15-year-olds might want to keep their pants on and to maybe respect themselves, or for a guy to want to talk to a girl and not just mess around physically or have sex with her. So really, when we're talking about abstinence, we're not talking about not doing something. We're talking about understanding the opposite sex, understanding relationships, and really understanding how you interact. And sexuality is one part of that. So let's understand it in its whole context and stop just defining it as not having sex, because there's a lot more to it than that. That's never made sense to me. So we're really talking about the whole person and their interaction with other people.
What's your advice to guys in this day and age about refraining from sex until marriage?
Let's first start off and say this is not about sex. Right? When you kind of talk to somebody and spend time with them and learn to communicate your emotions a little bit better, because you don't do that as well as a girl does at a young age because of their development. This whole thing is a muscle building exercise. And when you don't develop confidence and protection and trust with people, you know what? That's a muscle that you are going to need later in your life. And so for girls that even allow guys to do that, you're depriving us of a muscle that we need later because of something that looks good right now. And that's a really important thing to communicate to guys. And the thing that women most value is somebody later, I found, is somebody that had their best interest at hand and that had that person's needs over their own wants, because that seems to be love anyway, more the verb than the feeling. And so, there's just a lot of discussion to understand this topic better for guys in a much more meaningful way than one word called abstinence.
When we return, Chad shares some insight from his book, The Truth About Guys.
Facing life. Facing life. Facing life.
Chad, let's talk about your book a little bit, The Truth About Guys. In there you talk about an analogy called a walk in the woods. Take us briefly through that.
The book has, the truth about guys, and really it's an exploration of why we're different and all the ways we're different, and how that's funny and how that's sometimes weird as a teenager, but how it's important to understand those things. When it comes to sex, it is just as complicated. The walk in the woods, I always say, if you imagine walking through the woods and you're lost and you're on your way to a cabin, finally you get to this cabin, your cabin, you go up, you open the door, you go inside, you notice a big nice fire in a fireplace, and you take off your shoes and you go sit by the fire and drink hot chocolate. And I say, how do you feel? And a teen says, warm, fuzzy, happy, nice, content, Christmassy. And then I say, okay, this time let's do it again. You're walking through the woods, it's cold out, you get to this cabin, you go in, you shut the door behind you, and you notice the same fireplace and a nice big hot roaring fire, except this time it's in the middle of the room and it's burning through the floor and setting the couch ablaze. And I say, how do you feel? And then guys say, awesome, because fire's awesome. And then you're like, yeah, okay. And they say scared, nervous, frantic, all those things, prickly, not fuzzy. And I say, why? That doesn't make any sense. And finally we draw out that the only thing that changes there is where the fire takes place, right? And that literally went from keeping the house warm to burning it down. And the fireplace, understanding you can't have sex unless you understand the purpose of sex. You make it cheap, you make it sick, compared to something that it was meant to be, strong and meaningful. A place that, is the foundation of this home that that in it becomes safety and warmth and comfort and coziness. Outside of that, it starts out real passionate and exciting. It's always the thing that burns the house down. The kids that have sex in relationships as teenagers break up on average less than 4 weeks later. And the only reason is because it's a good thing. Like, we're not scaring anybody about sex. It's part of life, but it's oftentimes where that takes place that decides if it helps strengthen and warm a house or if it burns it down.
So in your analogy, the fireplace is marriage, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And why? Because the fireplace is there every morning and it doesn't leave you. And inside of it, it's strong and it's sturdy. And that's what the whole idea and conception of marriage really is that it's a permanent thing. It's the best permanent thing that we have. And inside of it, the whole idea of sex changes. Just because a student may make mistakes, it doesn't mean we can't strive to talk about the best place for them to have a physical relationship.
I wanted to know what it would take for today's youth to shift to a culture of waiting to have sex until marriage.
I think it's really up to our generation. We can say this all day long, but to really do it and to show other people, the younger people, that we're doing this and the fruit that it bears, this kind of lifestyle, just walking in front of them and showing them how it's done.
People look at this problem as too big, society's too big, but even if it's one life at a time, it's important. Decide to take this on as your own mission and mentor someone or work with a youth advocacy group. And if it's just making one difference in someone's life, then they can